Okay, I think we are successfully streaming live on Facebook on the Las Vegas Tri Club Facebook page, and we are recording. So go ahead and get started. I'm John Mercer, and I am a professor at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and this is a video conversation with TJ Tollakson and Jonathan Blyer to talk about bike frames and bike fitting. I've got Ted Gerard, who's co-hosting this with me. He's also faculty at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and his expertise is sports medicine and athletic training, and also a very highly competitive triathlete. So this is great to have everyone here. This video is done in large part for the biomechanics of endurance performance class at UNLV that I teach, but also for sports science at UNLV that we're trying to create a little bit more connection with industry partners. And so this is sort of a fun conversation around innovation. And then also for our Las Vegas Tri Club members and anyone else who may be out there listening. So thanks everyone for logging on. TJ, I gotta say just a quick personal thank you for inviting me to be part of your Diamond factory team. That's really was pretty special to get on that, and my frame is coming tomorrow, so I can't wait to start building it out.
I'm thrilled for you. It's a beautiful frame. It's got some UNLV colors in it, and we got some good publicity on Instagram for it already. So I'm excited for you to get it.
Yeah, no, it looks sharp. So I'm really looking forward to getting it built out, and then hopefully be able to find a nice route where it's not that crowded, and be able to do some riding outside. So that's great. Well, hey, thanks for both of you for joining us. And, I'll tell you that Diamond, I've always had my eye on that bike frame, TJ, because it's an innovative frame, and it's so different and unique that the people who ride it tend to be, finishing at the top of the races. So it's also a fast frame. And so this is really neat to be able to talk with you about how you've built Diamond and where you are now. And it's great to have John on here to talk about bike fitting, which is really pretty critical. I mean, you've got to have a good frame, but then you've got to be fit correctly to be able to, maximize what you do to go forward and go fast. So right. Maybe I'll just open it up. TJ, can you tell us give us a little bit of background about Diamond?
Sure. So I ended a long-term bike sponsorship with one of the biggest bike companies in the United States. And I struggled for about a year to find the right replacement for that sponsor. And finally, my wife said to me, this is back in 2010, she says, we weren't even married at the time, but she said, why don't you just forget the money and the contract and just go buy whatever bike you think is the fastest. Oh. And at the time I was a part of the Zip Wheels test rider program team. And so I was testing all the Zip wheels that they were coming out with, which at that time were all these Carbon Clincher Firecrest series wheels. And we took a trip to the wind tunnel, and Zip piled on this Zip 2001 frame built in 1996. Was the last production year for that frame. And and it's a beam bike that looks similar to the one that I have. And they took that frame to the wind tunnel, and the standard test frame that they were using at the time to test all the Zip wheels was a Cervelo P3 carbon. And they tested the Zip frame against that Cervelo, and it actually beat the Cervelo. The Zip frame beat the Cervelo frame at every yaw angle in the wind tunnel besides zero. And this was a frame that was super, super old, made in the 90s against things that were being engineered and manufactured in the 2000s. And so I told my wife that was the frame that I would want to ride. And so I contacted Zip. They gave me a name of an employee who had one, sold me that frame for $1,200. I took that frame and I won my very first Ironman. Well, I should start since I was in Utah and St. George, very close to UNLV. That was my first Ironman on that frame. I was third place there. And then a couple months later, I won my first Ironman in Lake Placid, New York, 2011, on a 15-year-old bike frame that was a beam bike design. And so right after that race, I begged the engineers at Zip to start manufacturing that frame again. And they said, look, our biggest customers are OE customers. We don't really want to be in the frame business, but if you're interested, we'll help. And so they loaned me some engineering firepower, and Dimond was born. And yeah, 2012, we made a prototype at a carbon factory in Boulder, Colorado. I raced Ironman New York City on that frame. And then the end of 2013, we built our own carbon fiber factory right here in Des Moines and started making frames. And 2014, we started shipping frames out of our factory here to customers all over the world.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I did not introduce you properly. You are a pro triathlete and high level triathlete, and it's really neat to see how you've incorporated a business around your triathlon career as well.
Yeah, it kind of started out as more of a hobby than it did a business, and it turned into a business pretty quickly.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to get into the frame a little bit, but let me get Jonathan. Jonathan can give us a little bit of background on ACME Bike Company. And, you know, I spent some time on Long Island, but I have to say, when I saw the name of your bike company, I always think of my cartoons. So maybe give us a little insight in why you chose that name too.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that was obviously the motivation for the name was going back to the Roadrunner cartoon. Yeah, I mean it's not the focus of the business, but certainly when we were starting up the business, you know, it's hard to think of a name for something, you know, like anything, and you know, branding was not my specialty, but I wanted a name that would kind of you know. Touch people in a certain way, remind them of their childhood. You know, most of my customers I figured are in the, you know, 30 to 50-year-old range right about now, and they would have remembered that cartoon. And yeah, it's a not too it's not too loud name. It's not, you know, like super flash bike fit or anything like that. You know, and as we came to find out afterwards, the word ACME actually means like the best or the pinnacle. Best of, which you know, I didn't even know at the time. But yeah, that was definitely the motivation from the name. Yeah, the ACME was founded in around 2011. I started bike fitting years earlier, around 2005 or so, working at another store in New York City, which is still around. But I got into bike fit largely, kind of like TJ's story. It was a hobby, and then it became a career. I was racing triathlon. I was a fast age grouper, took it very seriously and wanted the best out of my bike, and started looking around in New York. Was also, you know, following everything on the kind of on the internet related to bike fit. And I just saw this kind of this need for someone bringing modern thought to bike fit in this area. And I was able to kind of take my own thoughts from being an engineer, along with what I was seeing about bike fit and the internet, and kind of marry this thing together. And, you know, years later, we have a really pro process, which is really effective and works really well. But it very much was a gathering of thoughts from a lot of different places. And as I was able to kind of make a name for myself and build up the business amongst my friends, and my friends' friends, eventually we were able to start a proper business in a proper space, and, you know, really hit the ground running around 2011, 2012.
That's great. Well, and so I do want to talk a little bit about the business side of things. So TJ, with Dimond, you got a hold of the frame, and then you start building it here in the States. I mean, that's pretty unheard of. I mean, how did you get started with actually manufacturing the frame, even in Iowa at that point?
Sure. So again, it started in Boulder. So okay. I lived in Boulder the summer of 2008. I was actually living with Craig Alexander at the time. And there was a small carbon fiber company there, which was, I mean, it's crazy. It's now acquired. It's part of, they make military armor out of carbon fiber now. It's part of Angel Armor, which is a division of the company that owns a big cell phone case company called Otterbox. But anyway, so I was working with this carbon manufacturer in Boulder when I was there, and they actually made the first prototype frames for me. And it was a little bit of naivety, I guess, to think that, hey, I was going to take this frame and I was going to make it here. But at the same time, having vertical integration was really important for a startup company, right? And in terms of, I was going to prototype a bunch of stuff and then eventually manufacture it and sell it. And so we were started out. I mean, there was a group of 3 of us, and you know, we were all engineers, we were all body workers, we were all designers, and we did everything. And so that's kind of how you start a company like that. You know, and eventually, you know, it just grew and grew and grew, and we acquired more manufacturing capabilities, more equipment, more automation, able to really, we had to grow our staff at first really big, and now we're a much more manageable 6 employees right now with way more automation than we had before. But still, the biggest part about manufacturing carbon bikes is there's a whole bunch of body work involved with it. And that's kind of a dirty, nasty job. You have to wear a respirator mask and face protection. I wear Kevlar suits. So kind of a daily uniform here looks like COVID-19 protective wear.
Yeah.
We had our own supply of N95 masks here and that kind of stuff. So that's all part of kind of doing it. But yeah, it didn't, yeah, I guess I just said I didn't ever really anticipate it was going to take this much time or this much money to get the company to where it is now. It's certainly been a really big journey, but it was a journey I have no regrets over. I love having gone through that process and building everything up.
So you obviously have the expertise in terms of an athlete and what makes a frame fast, and you know, you have the triathlon experience. But where did you start getting this business experience to make this successful?
Yeah, so I mean, I was always interested in entrepreneurship. I studied entrepreneurship in college. I went to the University of Iowa, have a degree in industrial engineering, and I got a technological entrepreneurship certificate. I actually won 2 different business plan competitions when I was in college. So I've always been interested in it. And so after college, I went and I worked for Alcoa Aluminum, which is it's the world's largest aluminum producer. At least it was when I was working there. So I spent 2 years working for them, and I actually left that job to pursue triathlon full time. I left there and moved to the Olympic Training Center full time. And so that was my transition from work life to pro triathlon. And then it kind of came back. It was several years after I'd been racing pro, I started this company, and we started with just bicycle travel cases before I was doing the bikes. So it was quite a ways after that. I'd had a really good kind of basis of a business that generated good profit and cash flow before I just jumped in and started making my own carbon fiber factory. But yeah, working at Alcoa helped a lot too, just because almost everything on the bike that's not carbon is aluminum. And so having the expertise in aluminum helps a lot too, to know which alloys to use, whether we're using 6,000, 7,000 series, where the hardest parts need to be, whether you can have something be die cast or it needs to be CNC machined, what type of anode processes work well, what doesn't. And so that was a good background into getting into it, but there's nothing like the school of hard knocks. And so I don't care how much you learn doing anything, you learn the most by doing. And so I'd say I learned way more by just jumping in.
Well, I loved what you said in your I think it was your last vlog, or maybe it was the one before that, where you said every bike you make it a little better. And that's really neat. So let's talk about the bike and the frame and what makes it fast, and what are some of the physics behind. I'm looking at your in your background there. You've got a nice diagram of some airflow around something. So what are the key elements that you look for in designing a fast frame?
John, before he answers that, can we share some pictures of the bike? Because I think some of these people may not have seen it before or know what we're talking about. Because it is something completely different, I think, for most people. I've got it on my screen, but do you have something?
I do not. Yeah, go ahead and bring yours up because I got the live running, so I don't think I can get to it.
Yeah, there you go. So there's a picture of what the frame looks like. It's actually, we started several iterations before that frame when we have um, we just keep improving the frame and making it better. But yeah, the top frame, the marquee frame, is our #1 selling bike. It's actually uh, the #1 selling volume frame that we produced for a little while now. So it has integrated storage for your nutrition on the top and your
Is that
flat
up
kit
in
on the
here?
bottom. Yeah, yeah. So there's a little lid that lifts up there for your nutrition storage, and then right above the crank, that right there. Yep, there's a storage box there for your flat kit. So
Okay,
it's all
cool.
built into the frame. But yeah, so I had this kind of wind tunnel experience when I was, again, doing the test rider stuff for Zip, and took that experience. And I would say I was probably one of the first pro triathletes ever to personally fund my own trips to the wind tunnel to start studying this kind of stuff. And I would also say right now that out of all the triathletes, and I'd say one exception, and that was Lance Armstrong, was a pro triathlete for a brief period of time. I'd say, at the exception of Lance, I would say I have the most wind tunnel time, personal wind tunnel time, out of any pro triathlete. And so I've tested numerous different frames, numerous different products, and it's something I do on an annual basis, right? I mean, we just keep doing more testing. And the cool part about testing is you learn so much. The bad part about testing is every time you test in the wind tunnel, if you're good at it, you leave with more questions than you have answers. And so those questions just lead to what you're going to test and develop next. But yeah, so I knew these elements made a bike fast. I've worked with really great designers. The designer of the marquee, actually, Matt Szymanski, is an aerospace engineer from Ohio State. And so every design aspect on that bike is an airfoil. So if you look at it from the top and the front, you'll notice that every shape, every tube shape is an airfoil. And so from the fork blades to the beam shape, the seat post shape. And so it's just calculating what size of those airfoils you want, and then what the interaction between all the different airfoils is going to make while you're riding the bike. And so it's an interesting, wind tunnels are interesting experiences. We do standard tests at 30 miles per hour in the wind tunnel, which is a little bit faster than you're going to average for a triathlon. I've had a couple bike splits in my career that have been over 28 miles per hour for half Ironmans, but that's kind of the exception, not the norm. You're usually riding somewhere around 25 or 26 miles per hour. But testing at 30 miles per hour allows things to really separate more, so you can see the data differences. Being at slower just produces more noise in the testing, so it's hard to differentiate between one thing that's faster and one thing that's not. But yeah, it's a constant process, and so when I make that claim, it's just true, right? I mean, every good manufacturer should say that the frames they make today were better than the frames they made yesterday. And certainly when I look back and say, look, the frames that I made in 2014 when we started were good frames, and I still have them. They're hanging on my wall here. And I would have no problems getting one down and riding it. But certainly the frames that I make today are way superior to what I've ever done in the past. And as I keep making more frames, it just keeps getting better. And so I'm still a really small company. I only make a few hundred bikes a year, as opposed to the giant companies that are, Giant Bicycles, Specialized Trek, making tens of thousands of bicycles a year. So it is still a very, very small company, very niche market. But yeah, I love it. And it's just a constant grind to innovate and create new designs and improvements. And it's looking for anything that can help make an athlete faster.
So when you do your wind tunnel testing, just curious, do you test with the wheels sometimes and sometimes without the wheels to test just the frame components?
So we test, and we started this, and so I tell everybody about this still. The very first wind tunnel trip we made for Dimond, we used Zip 808 Firecrest wheels with Continental 4000 GP 4000 tires on it. We have the same set of wheels that we use just for wind tunnel testing, the same set of tires, everything. And then the bike that we use as our standard for comparison is actually a Cervelo P56. And so those are the things that always come with us to every trip we make to the wind tunnel. Okay. So we bring those wheels and that test frame because it always provides a constant standard of comparison. So we always know that whatever the grams of drag were the last time, we can put that exact same setup in and use it as our control when we're conducting a new experiment. And so we do test just the frame without the wheels, but the rig in the wind tunnel, you have to mount wheels too, but it's whether or not you don't have to actually spin the wheels during the test, but that's one of the things that we do as well is we'll spin the wheels usually to match the wind speed, but we can control the spin of those two down to 25 miles per hour.
So do you guys do the CFD testing as well? Right.
So so CFD, computational fluid dynamics, for those who aren't familiar with that acronym, but what that is, and we don't have a super complicated package. We just use what's available in SolidWorks, but the CFD package in SolidWorks gives you a pretty good idea of how your airfoils are going to interact with each other and with a spinning wheel. But yeah, I mean, the very high end of that is not bicycle. It's really in aerospace as well as auto racing. So if you look at like what the McLaren F1 team does, I mean, they're doing a whole bunch of CFD studying on their components. So we're at the very basic level for that. And it's good to run a CFD program to see whether or not a gross change is going to affect something, but it's really hard because small changes are just unpredictable in CFD. And so that's why you need the wind tunnel to verify.
How about on-road testing, like with the Chung method or like AeroLab or something like that? Do you do much of that?
Yeah, so we actually started doing that long before those were even options to do, right? So we just started, and the guys at Best Bike Split have actually, if you guys don't know that software, bestbikesplit.com, some friends of mine who are also just a bunch of math geeks. But we started using that same software that they have to basically go out and say, all right, if we're just on a flat road and we take all these intervals, so you get into position, ride your bike, calculate the power, try to hold the same power for each run, you can basically say whether or not something that you're changing in your bike position or your equipment is making you faster or slower. And so the biggest thing you have to account for is wind differences. And so that's why having advanced weather metrics helps a lot. But it is a great way to look at and just say, hey, is this position faster? Is this position faster? Is this wheel faster? Is this wheel faster? And we still do that testing today. So when we come out with prototypes, that's the first test that we actually do, is we just take it out and we ride it and we say, hey, is this actually going to be faster? Is it worth looking at? And the best way to do that is you just look at your speed, your power, and wind speed, and gives you a rough calculation.
Awesome.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Well, let's segue over to Jonathan then.
Yeah.
You're talking about position. John, that's what you deal with a lot. And obviously you need a frame that has some adjustability. And I think Dimond, you have several sizes that people can choose from. But what tools do you start using to get someone set up on the frame so that they are able to generate the right amount of power that they can sustain for a long period of time and be, aerodynamic fit, or have the best aerodynamic fit?
And so we do our bike fits probably a little differently than a lot of other fit studios that are out there. We're ACME, so we want to do it the best, and that also means the most complicated. So when anyone comes in for a bike fit in our studio, we always put them on our fitting bike rather than trying to fit them on their actual bike. And the reason for that is just that the fitting bike just opens up a whole large amount of variables that we can test with easily, quickly, seamlessly, without it being a clumsy, slow experience. So we put someone on our fit bike. If they come in with a bike we'll take the measurements from their bike and kind of match our fit bike to that for start. Or if they don't come in with a bike and they're looking to buy something new, we'll start with kind of a generic set of fit coordinates. but we always work there. And that's kind of a different thing than other bike fitters do. We also have probably the best fit bike that's out there. It's this Guru Dynamic Fit Unit. So it's motorized. So when we want to move things around, we don't have to go get into the fit bike and start like spinning a crank or pulling a lever or anything like that. It's all done from our keyboard. And that allows us to kind of take a position a little further away from the client so we can evaluate how their whole body is looking and evaluate their body language, use all our senses to kind of evaluate what's going on with them and make the changes and do it in a very methodic manner. We can save different positions, so we can kind of say, okay, we like the way this is looking here. Let's save this, put it aside, try something else. Then we can kind of come back and compare. So, the tooling makes a very big difference in what we're doing. But that's not to say that, every bike fitter in the world needs these, space age tools. You can do a pretty good job if you have the knowledge and experience with, a simpler set of tools. But certainly getting someone on a fit bike is something that we think has a ton of value, even though it is more complicated, and it does open up kind of chances to make mistakes if your math isn't so great when you're trying to kind of bring things from the fit bike world back to a real bike or something like that. You can certainly wind up with the situation, but overall it gives us a lot more ability to execute better fits, which is why we use it. Oh, look at that. So yeah, there's a good picture of the Guru Fit Bike. I think I was there that day when that photo was taken.
Awesome.
So yeah, that if you look closely, kind of like right in front of the handlebar, you'll see one of the little motors that's kind of hanging out on the
Right
bottom.
here?
That's it right there. And then that kind of carriage right above it has a machine screw in it, and it'll slide the handlebar kind of forwards and backwards. And then there's 3 or 4 others of those in that machine. There's one that raises the bars up and down, which is pretty clear to see, one that raises the seat up and down, forward and backward. And this machine also has adjustable length crank arms, which kind of hard to see. They're not motorized. That would be a really cool invention. But the crank arm length is certainly a hot topic right now in triathlon. So being able to adjust crank arm length on a fit bike is great, and it takes about 3 minutes to make a change, and it's something that you can't practically experiment with on an actual bike, because it's definitely not 3 minutes to change the crank arms on an actual bike. So I like to describe this machine as our canvas, and we're going to create a painting, and the painting is that rider's perfect bike. When we're all done with the bike fit, we're then taking measurements off of the fit bike and trying to find a bike that matches. And oftentimes we're looking at the different manufacturers' charts, TJ and Diamond's included, and trying to make sure that we get the rider on a bike that fits them well and that also has future adjustability built in. It's certainly possible to put someone who's like 5'2" on a size 56 bike, or a size large bike, but they'll be absolutely at the limit of adjustability of that bike, and that's a situation that we want to try to avoid. We want someone to get on the bike and then to allow for their body to potentially change over the years. These bikes cost a lot of money, and for most people, they're not something they're going to buy every year or every 2 years. It might be like once every 4 or 5 years, and even over the course of a few years, the body can change quite a bit. So we want to make sure that we can account for that in the future, so that the rider doesn't like outgrow their bike, for better or worse.
Jonathan, when you're setting this up, are you setting this up based off of like norm tables and norm values, or is it more just feedback, camera A, camera B, or sorry, lens A, lens B? What's the system that you like to utilize?
So I mean, there's lots of ways you can work this thing, and there's different fit processes or fit protocols that exist. We like to just kind of really let the rider's individual body drive what we're going to do. And a lot of that relates to their muscle memory, their fitness level, their flexibility level, their muscle firing patterns and stuff like that. Things that you can't really account for with a even with motion capture, we like to let the rider's own personal nuances come out. And our number one metric for, how we're going to assess if a change we make is a positive one or not, is a qualitative one, not a quantitative one. And we're trying to assess the quality of motion from the rider. And from a power production standpoint on a bike, that means the legs are doing all the work and the upper body, the torso is still, right? Any upper body motion is a waste of energy. It's going to lead to saddle discomfort issues or just, create some problems. So we want like all the power coming out of the legs, and we want quiet hips, quiet upper body. And we use kind of that simple metric alone for pretty much everything that we're assessing on the bike. There's a very kind of, simple way of looking at someone on a bike and saying, oh, that rider's seat is too high, and because their hips are rocking. And that's very true. So we want a good range of motion out of the rider's knee and hip and ankle, so they're able to generate power. But yeah, as soon as you get too high with that seat height and you try to like overextend their knee joint, there's a compensation. And that compensation causes their hips to start to oscillate back and forth. So we methodically raise someone's seat under power, and we're interacting with the client and talking with them and observing the whole while. Motion capture does exist, and motion capture is a really cool way to put numbers on a rider and to say, oh, your knee angle extension is 38 degrees, and the acceptable range for that is 37 to 42. So we're in that range, and like that's great. We did a great fit. But that's not true, because the range that's kind of normally acceptable is enormous. That might relate to 20 or 30 millimeters of saddle height. And through our process, we're able to kind of narrow down to maybe 5 millimeters of saddle height, like option A, option B. So that's what this tool lets us do really well. That's why we're such a strong believer in using it.
So Jonathan, real quick, this bike has an ergometer on there. So talk about how you use the ergometer with your fits.
Yeah, for sure. So this bike actually doesn't, but the one in that picture, that has a Tax Bushido, I believe, which is not a very good trainer. But we do use ergometers. CompuTrainer is the gold standard even today, even though they're, RIP CompuTrainer, they're out of business. But we use an ergometer. For anyone not super familiar with what an ergometer does, it maintains the rider at a constant power output. So power is what we're after from a bike fit perspective. Power is the product. When you talk about angular motion, power is the product of torque and RPM or cadence. So what an ergometer does is it senses kind of in real time what the rider is outputting. And it maintains the rider at a steady power output. So if the rider slows down their cadence, then the resistance from the unit raises. Or if a rider increases their cadence, then the resistance from the unit decreases. And the fitter has control of that, or sometimes the rider. So what we'll do is kind of get someone warmed up and then slowly ramp up the power during the bike fit. And a lot of the times we work people pretty hard during our bike fit process. The body reacts differently. If you want to talk about like a percentage of threshold values, the body operates differently at 20 or 30% of threshold, which is very low and very comfortable. And that's what people come in and they want to do. But we say, oh, sorry, we're going to have to get you up to like 80 or 90% of threshold for their triathletes, or for some bike racers, we have them at threshold or even higher. So we supply towels and we have a fan because people get pretty sweaty during the bike fits. And that's really valuable because if we do a bike fit for someone at 50% of their threshold and then they go out and they do a race the next day, that's a different position. Their body is acting differently at the different power outputs. So it's a really important thing to keep that ergometer running and to maintain using it. And one of the reasons we didn't like that Tax unit that was on the unit in the picture is because it didn't have a very reliable ergometer setting. Yeah, it's valuable.
So Jonathan, with your expertise, I imagine when you go to watch a race, if you're not competing, you probably have a hard time just watching and looking at people fit and how they're fit on their bikes. You know, when you watch a race, what percent probably would you sit there and say, oh, those are bad fits?
Yeah, well, it depends on the race to some extent. When you go to Kona, 5% have bad fits. When you go to, you know, mom and pop's local duathlon, you know, 5% have good fits. So it very much depends on kind of the, you know, the quality of the field. And I hate to use that term, but it does. You know, the more competitive, the faster, the more experienced athlete you have, you know, they are going to figure out sooner or later that they need a good bike fit. And, you know, time in the saddle is the ultimate test of that. You know, the more and more time people are on their bike, training, racing, et cetera, it's just a matter of time before bike fit issues tend to creep up. So, you know, those more experienced athletes always have better fits.
Yeah. So then where do you focus your fit on in the beginning? There's a question here. Melissa's going to do her thesis a bit on our professional paper on some bike fit. So, you know, where do you start? What are the biggest changes that you say, okay, I know I'm going to start here, and then move off of that?
So, I mean, when someone will come in, you start off just getting to know them. And, you know, we're providing a service to people. So someone could come in and have 19 issues with their bike that we're able to pick up. You know, I'm just making up a number, but someone might come in and we might say, oh, this person has this wrong and this wrong and this wrong. But I want to know from that person what their complaints are, what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve. Because a lot of these issues cost money. So if I want to change someone's crank length, you know, $300. If I want to change their saddle, $200 at least. You know, if I want to change their bike, you know, $5,000 to $10,000. So if money is no object, okay, great, we're going to give them everything. But you know, for a lot of people, that does factor in. So we try to pick out whatever red flags we see, partnered up with whatever complaints they have, and we want to address those things first. So you know, I'm not trying to you know, sell people every single thing that I have in stock every time. I just want to address their issues first, you know, whatever that may be. So if someone comes in and they're having some like major low back issues and saddle issues, you know, I'm going to point that to the saddle, even if their crank arms are say too long or, you know, rarely too short. I might not bring up the crank arm thing until later on and really just try to focus on their issue. But most people struggle with saddle issues or upper body discomfort issues. Those are probably the two most common complaints that people come in with.
Interesting.
Yeah, I want to hop in here just because I know JV's a really big. I'd say one of his biggest specialties is actually saddle fit, right? So can you talk about what makes a good saddle fit and what doesn't?
I can talk about what doesn't, but you know, it's hard to say what
Sure.
does because it's so nuanced between each individual. You know, an old school, you know, saddle that you might find on a tri bike from 15 years ago was basically a physique area on tri, which cross section is like a round thing that you know, put your tender bits on and hope that you're, you know, going to survive. And largely we've moved away from those as an industry. Most of the saddles today have two individual support pieces that support your pelvis, and there's a pressure relief channel down the middle. And that's the overwhelming majority of popular saddles these days. And they all do a pretty good job with pressure relief. But because the saddles have gotten wider, because the nose basically has to get wider to accommodate that pressure relief gap, there's all sorts of other issues that have now been formed, mainly chafing, hot spots, that kind of thing. And because you're dealing with a smaller kind of amount of square footage to plant yourself on, you know, pressure goes up in those spots. So while we've largely solved the like soft tissue complaints, there's all sorts of other complaints that have arisen. And there's not really great science on how someone finds that perfect saddle. We've created a tool which lets us change saddles very quickly underneath the rider. So they can kind of, in a sense, speed date saddles when they come in for a bike fit. So we can change between like, I don't know, maybe 10 saddles in the course of a minute or two, very quickly. And that lets us kind of start with this huge selection and narrow it down to the one that we think is going to work best for the rider. And it's really the rider driving that decision. You know, we might have some ideas about what might work based on their feedback, but it's very much rider based. And we sell saddles to, say, 80% of different people that come in, not because we're pushing saddles on them, but because they want to buy the saddle after going through our process.
But TJ,
John, how many saddles? Oh, real quick, John, how many saddles do you have on your fit wall right now?
Probably 40.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have a lot. There's probably our top 10 that we do a lot of, but we probably have about 40 out, and then there's even more in the back. So yeah, we have a lot.
TJ, as a pro triathlete, let's say in a given 2 or 3 year period, how many saddles would you potentially have tried?
I would say my entire career so this is a 16-year career at this point. So I've probably been on 6 different saddles in that period of time. And like JB was saying, so much of that is the saddles that were available at the start were so much different. I rode that Arione saddle for a long time. I mean, it was the most popular saddle for a really long time. I've had a couple of short nose saddles, but like Jonathan was saying as well, like I had problems with most of those with the width. And so finding the right saddle for me has kind of been tricky. For the last 2 years, I've been riding a Shimano saddle. Jonathan probably knows what saddle it is, but it's a super narrow nose saddle. And so it's traditional, it's long, but it's really narrow. And that's just what works for me in the position. I raced the saddle before this. I was actually racing a short nose Salitalia Iron Flow, which is their tri-specific saddle. And it was great. And then all of a sudden I had some pinching on a nerve down there, and my leg started going numb. But I'd ridden the saddle for 2 years. And so what causes any of that? I don't really know. But when that happened, I didn't have much of a choice, but hey, let's change again. And when that happened, because it was the width of it was the problem where I was impinging, I needed to just come narrow. And so that's how I ended up on a narrower saddle.
The reason I asked is because, so many triathletes in particular struggle with this. And, and Jonathan, I guess, you're with 40 saddles. I mean, that's great. But, so many people I've worked with as well, like they'll say, yeah, I've had the same saddle for 2 years. And all of a sudden it's like, it's no longer good anymore.
Right.
And it's like, well, did the padding break down? No, not really. Like, I think their body just is compensated as much as it possibly can, and it can't anymore. Now it's time to try something new.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the body changes. And like TJ was saying, like he rode this thing for a long time, then all of a sudden he had a pinched nerve, and it, caused some real issues. And that's not uncommon at all. I kind of like to think of sitting on a saddle, like getting a cut and then it's scabbing over and healing. So every time you sit on that saddle, think of getting a cut and it scabs over and heals. And if you don't wait long enough for it to scab over and heal before you get on the bike again, then you're going to peel the scab off and something bad's going to happen. So that happens quite a bit for people who ride a lot if they don't space it out a little bit. Just the saddle issues just mound and mound, whereas if they maybe took a day in between, it would flatten the curve a little bit.
Well, it's funny, TJ, when we were setting up this call, one of the first things you did is say, hey, I want to bring on Jonathan as, for bike fitting expertise. And that was really cool and got me thinking, you obviously listen to your athletes and how to innovate your frame. For example, the boxes and the functionality you've built into it. What information do you get, TJ, from fitters that you then try to build back into your frame?
Right. So the biggest one, you see, we had this, and it wasn't with Jonathan on this, but we worked with the 51 Speed Shop fitters on our aero bar. So our hardware uses the same thing, and so the extensions on the bar are made to be easily adjustable, so you get this stack and reach. And what we talked about with Jonathan is Jonathan has these amazing, I don't even, what do you want to call it, Jonathan? A calculator? What is it? What do you use?
Spreadsheets. I'm a big Microsoft Excel dork, and I love Excel. I'll build any Excel spreadsheet anybody wants. So we basically worked with. We also worked with 51 Speed Shop to develop a Excel-based calculator where you input your frame coordinates, stack and reach of the frame, and you input your fit coordinates, and it spits out what configuration of the aero bar you need, because there's probably 200 different ways you could assemble that aero bar, and you don't want to start guessing. So yeah, we just created this spreadsheet to help help streamline the process, so there's less time wasted.
Right. I've got a cool new bar design that I'm just starting to talk to Jonathan about using, so we get some input on what that design is going to look like. But most of the stuff with fitters all has to do with adjustability. And I actually met Jonathan in 2012, the year after I won Lake Placid, I believe. I was in Brooklyn, and that's where we met. But one of his big things was like, he wanted to make sure that components were adjustable and swappable on bikes. And when we're talking about the Dimond, it has an 1 1/8" steer tube on it. Jonathan was a huge proponent of, hey, I want to be able to put an integrated bar or a non-integrated bar on this. He said, one of my frustrations with the Trek speed concept is that it uses this weird bolt, and you got to put their bar on it. It's really hard to get away from it. And so a lot of that discussion has to do with just making the bike so a bike fitter can actually adjust and fit the person to the frame. I don't know, Jonathan, what else you got there?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, that's the magic right there. That Trek bike is still the same, by the way. So yeah. They haven't done anything. But yeah, I mean, if I do a fit with someone and I need to move, a arm pad around 15 millimeters, there's no reason that should take 3 weeks and $500. It does on some of these bikes because they just don't have adjustability built into them. I want to be able to do that right then and there for the customer so they can go out and ride. They don't want to have to come back, to get this thing all set up. So these new bars that are out are awesome. They look great on the bike, which is very important. They're seamless, very few wires exposed, if any, and they provide a huge amount of adjustability. So yeah, I mean, that's great. It drives me crazy when someone comes in with some insanely expensive bike and we can't adjust it for whatever reason, or it's a kind of a silly complaint, but the hardware stinks on a lot of these things. So we want some high quality hardware that we can work with. Triathletes are sweating all over their bikes indoors. These things rust really easily. On these Trek bikes, not to totally talk poorly about them, but they rust almost immediately. You can have a brand new bolt and you put an Allen key in it to turn it, and the thing just disintegrates underneath you. So having something that's high quality, easy to adjust, and that can hit a huge fit range, that's what we want. And that's what we have now, thankfully, with a lot of the new products.
Well, you're both in very competitive fields, both with, bike fitting, that's very competitive, and obviously frame building as well. How do you both stay in front of the competition and constantly innovate, and maybe what new technology are you starting to maybe take advantage of or incorporate?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one first. So my biggest key to staying in front is, one, I'm very small and agile as a company. And so I can innovate and because my production runs are so small, I can innovate super rapidly. We've got a giant 3D printer here that prints that 1 meter by 1 meter by half meter high. So I can print entire frames. And the coolest technology that we're doing right now, you're going to hear it here first, but I'm working on a couple new frames that are traditional double diamond frames. But we have this technology now where we can print a bike frame, and then we can manufacture our own mold right out of carbon fiber and fiberglass in our factory to make the bike right there. And so, I mean, that technology hasn't existed for that long for us to be able to do that. But it's really cool because I have the capabilities to do all that in-house. And I have a small team, and so we can just run and jump and get on it. There's way less bureaucracy involved with it. But at the downside to that, right, is I am a small company, so I don't have a $2 million R&D budget every year, right? So I am doing everything on a shoestring budget. So I'm relying on a small team of super dedicated employees that are just passionate about this, like I am, that say, hey, let's do it. Let's innovate for the sake of innovation. And let's spend the time and energy necessary to do it. And that's where we've been able to kind of keep our advantage and stay ahead of the curve.
Well, yeah, I'm curious. I want to get to Jonathan as well, but I'm curious on the 3D printing. Do you see a time where you're actually going to build a skeleton of a frame and then build a fairing that goes on it and you adjust it for different races?
Yeah, I mean, yes, that is, yeah, 3D printing is definitely the future. It's going to continue to improve, and we already see it now, and just in the substrates you can print. I mean, you can print metal, right? You can print carbon fiber. So that's going to continue to improve, and the durability, the quality is going to be really good. And so when you think about that, and I come from this aluminum background where you talk about CAD CAM capabilities of designing it on a computer and then making an aluminum part out of it. Well, you're going to be able to make carbon fiber parts like that. And it's just a matter of when. And so we want to be on the forefront of that. And yeah, then you talk about popping in your CFD on that, and you can actually use your bike fitter. You can put yourself on the thing. You can design the bike with your bike fitter to put you in the right position and then fair your bike in your position at the same time. It's pretty amazing what the future will look like, and it will be very integrated. It'll have all your nutrition, all your hydration, everything just for you on the bike. And so I have a pretty good vision of what it looks like and what these baby steps are to get there. And so I think that's another advantage of the small company is I live this every day. It is what I do, right? And so I'm taking these little steps one at a time to get there. And, partnering with people like Jonathan obviously helps me get there faster.
Well, and I think that's what's always been neat about what you've done with the hen house and the bike case and then the bike. You're always trying to innovate, and that's exciting to see. And so that's neat. Jonathan, how about on the bike fitting? I know the Guru. I mean, that's like at least 12,000. I know I almost pulled the plug on purchasing a used one. That's a great piece of technology, but where do you see bike fitting going with technology?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure exactly, to be honest. The Guru machine is, very expensive and cost prohibitive for a lot of independent fitters and bike shops. So, it's probably not going there, and I don't think everyone is going to have a Guru machine next week. But availability to other technologies is definitely growing, and I've also seen a huge improvement just in the public's awareness of bike fit over the last 10 years. Bike fit is mainstream now. It's part of every every team in the Tour de France's preparation. It's part of every pro triathlete's career. So bike fit is very much in the limelight now, where it wasn't 10 or 15 years ago. So for us as small business owners, located in metropolitan New York City, people are driven to that, now much more than they were beforehand. We've constantly been trying to educate people on the practice of getting a fit before they buy anything, so they can avoid spending all their money on a bike that doesn't fit them, because that happens, or they wind up on the wrong size or something like that. And we've had to do less and less of that over the bike fit has become more commonplace, and then people have heard about it one way or another. But the technology is changing. There are all sorts of apps out there that are beginning to do like CFD testing, from an iPad, not really, but sort of, where it'll take some virtual 3D model of someone and you send it out to some computer and you get it back 2 weeks later. But I don't think that's really the future. That might be interesting and it might look cool to people, but I don't think the reliability is there for that type of stuff where you can really trust the data. So for us, as kind of small service providers, we're just try to do the best we can every day with all of our customers, keeping our ear to the ground for new technologies and new practices that are out there. But it's a very kind of wholesome business model. We're just trying to do the best we can for every customer. They have a great experience. We take our time with them, and then they tell their friends, and their friends come in too. And that's really how we've grown our business to where it is now.
That's great.
So can I jump in? So obviously, you're in New York, we're in Las Vegas. What should, the members of the Las Vegas Triathlon Club or people out here, what should we look for in a bike fitter? What are some things we should look for? And then, without being too crass, how much should we pay?
Sure. I would say the most important thing to look for in a bike fitter is one that answers your questions with patience and is responsive, and is able to build that relationship with the person. Because time and time again, that's where we kind of hear about bike fitters failing, as they have some initial session with someone, and there might be some follow-up that's necessary, and then the bike fitter totally drops the ball. So above all, you want someone who you can build a relationship with, on and on. The technology, yeah, it matters, but that's definitely, not a deal breaker if they don't have like the latest and the greatest of everything. Certainly the reputation is very important. It's hard to establish oneself for sure. But if someone has a great reputation, they've worked very hard to do that, and they've probably done some very great work. So asking around within your community, I don't know too much about the bike fit scene out in Las Vegas, but I imagine it's a pretty big city. There's got to be a few people out there kind of trying to get some business. So, certainly asking around, and definitely within triathlon, triathlon fit is sort of its own thing. There are plenty of great people out there who I'd recommend to go to get set up on a road bike. But triathlon fit is sort of its own beast. And a lot of bike fitters out there kind of look down on triathlon in some way or another, think it's weird, don't understand, all the nuances of triathlon. So you certainly want someone who can empathize, someone who's ridden a tri bike, someone who's done an Ironman. They don't have to be competitive, they just have to have spent, lots and lots of time on a tri bike so they can understand what it feels like, being on a bike for 6 hours a day in the aero position, and, how terrible it can be, and also how great it can be. There's a lot out there. There's a lot to look for in a person. And I wouldn't, I'm not going to spend other people's money, but it's a lot more expensive to have to get 3 bad bike fits than it is to get 1 good bike fit. So if someone charges more money and they have the better reputation and they stand by their work, that's money very, very well spent. Especially if you're going to use that information to then buy a $10,000 bike. You don't want to buy the wrong one.
So let me jump in here just to reiterate some of this. What I kind of look for in a bike fitter is somebody who has flexible opinions about what works for different people. One of my biggest turnoffs in a bike fitter, we'll talk about the crank length, because that's one thing. And when last time I was in to see JB, we talked about this. But some bike fitters might really push super short cranks on you. They might say, look, you're going to be 100% better if you use these cranks. And you as an athlete might say, you know what, I didn't like it. I didn't feel comfortable. And you got the right bike fitter when they then hear you say that and say, all right, if you're not comfortable on there, let's roll with what you're comfortable and let's make it work. And so to me, that's a lot of the bike fitting process. And it's one of the reasons I like working with Jonathan so much is his first thing comes with the relationship with the athlete, and then the athlete's relationship with their own bike and equipment. And then what else would I say about the deal? Jonathan, how many bike fits do you do a year for people who don't live in the New York City area?
40 or 50, I'd say.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, we have people coming in from elsewhere, from probably maybe 4 or 5 hour drive we've had. So
yeah, or flying in, right? People flying to New York.
Yeah, we have people flying in. Yeah, we get people flying in from the Caribbean or from Europe or the Middle East from time to time.
Do you ever do any virtual?
We hadn't until this whole pandemic thing.
Right.
The virtual fits we did just start doing, mainly as a way to stay in touch with our customer base. Some bike fitters are still operating, not in New York because things are so bad. But some bike fitters around the country are still operating. We didn't feel even though we legally probably could, because bike shops are considered essential businesses. It's just not really in the spirit with this whole pandemic. So we started offering virtual fits for people who have, real kind of macro issues, because we certainly can't solve micro issues through a virtual fit. But we've had a few people, and they take videos of themselves on the trainer, and we're able to kind of advise on a few kind of easy, low-hanging fruit to try to make their bike positions better. But, certainly we're not trying to like dial in someone's cleat position, virtually, or, advise on saddle selection or arm pad spacing or anything like that. It's more like, my knee hurts. What do you think's going on? Kind of bigger issues.
Okay.
Well, this is fantastic. I mean, I could talk all afternoon, and well, I do have all afternoon, but yeah. But I want to respect your time for both of you, and this has been great. But I want to try to end with a question that is more for my students. Beginning of the semester, I always announce that we do a semester group project, and everyone groans. They're like, "Oh, group projects," and I even admit to them, I say I hate group projects too, because it's hard to get 4 random people to start working together. But what I'm hearing from both of you is you both are running, in essence, group projects. So could you sort of talk about what type of people do you surround yourself with to help support what you're doing?
Yeah, look, my latest talks with Jonathan were that, hey, I mean, times are tough right now, right? And they're really uncertain, especially, Jonathan's in Brooklyn, right? So he's at ground zero for this pandemic, right? And so I'm worried about his business, and I want to make sure that his business is being supported and that he can survive this and come out and still have a business. And I rely on customers as well as I rely on business to business interactions. And so I want to make sure that they're supportive. But yeah, I mean, this is, even the whole sport of triathlon is a small industry, and not every small triathlon company is going to make it in 6 months. And so they don't anyway, but right now there'll be more that fail. And so I want to stay in business, and I want those companies that I have a good relationship, that I believe in, I want them to survive too. And so from that standpoint, it really is symbiotic, right? That if I can thrive and Jonathan can thrive and other brands that I have relationships with do well, then we will survive and we'll thrive on the other side of this. So it's always a team effort, whether it's my own team or the other teams in the industry. It's always a team effort.
That's great.
Absolutely, it is a very small industry. Even though it is very global. TJ and I'm sure if we compared our contact list, we have a great deal of overlap. So certainly, the relationships are crucial. In this industry, and I'm sure in pretty much any other industry as well. But having people you can rely on for information or to bounce ideas off of, or anything like that, is super valuable. And there are networks out there. I'm a member of all these different groups with other bike fitters and entrepreneurs and engineers, et cetera. And it's great to just have all these groups of people, that are trying to just raise the bar together. Everyone's trying to help each other out for the most part. It is a pretty great industry to work in. There's very few jerks in the bike industry. They are out there, but pretty much everyone, in TJ's shoes or my own, or we mentioned the guys from 51 Speed Shop. These small entrepreneurs. We're all trying to do the same thing, and we don't really compete with each other very much. So we're all just trying to help each other out, and and that very much has been successful. I'd say there's definitely an international team of people that all just help each other out, and it's a pretty great industry.
Oh, that's great. And I know I'm more familiar with Dimond, and, you built this company and you develop a great product that's competitive with, the top manufacturers anywhere. And you've done it with, grit and hard work, and you're both innovating, and it's really neat to sit here and chat with you and see what you've built out. So, hopefully we'll all survive, you know, coming out on this pandemic on a better side. You know, TJ, you said, you know, this is going to be a tough time for small businesses, but you've built your companies around the right values, and hopefully that's what comes out of this. So.
Yeah, thank you. I hope so too.
Well, I can't wait for tomorrow, TJ. I'm going to be watching that UPS truck come up.
Yeah, we might have to get another live stream tomorrow just so we can see the reaction.
I know. I think I'll have to set up my GoPro and do like a time lapse of getting it set up. So
yeah, let's do it.
Then I have to get fit on it correctly, Jonathan. And hopefully I'll be
good. Yeah, let me know when you're back out the East Coast. I'd wait a little.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Well, I'm gonna end the live stream, and I'm gonna end the recording, and I'm gonna do a big thank you to both of you for being generous with your time and chatting with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
John. Thanks, Ted.